Howdy. This is Mission Texas.
A political podcast about winning Texas by 2032, or else we may lose the White House for a generation.
I'm one of your hosts, Alex Clark.
And I am Kate Rumsey.
Other podcasts may focus on the day-to-day or the next election, but we are keeping the eyes of Texas on the bigger prize. What happens after the next census?
Welcome to another exciting episode of Mission Texas. Today we are joined by John Turner, who will be telling us a little bit about what it was like to go from a very successful law practice to deciding to throw your hat in the ring and flip a district in 2018. I really like to get started at the very beginning, though. I happen to know your background is in politics in the sense that your dad, is that right, who was involved? He had run for office of some sort?
That's right. So I grew up, Alex, in Crockett, Texas, small town in East Texas. My dad, Jim Turner, was involved in local politics there when I was growing up, from the time I was about 5 years old. He was in the Texas House and then the Texas Senate. He was the mayor of our town. And then finally, he served in Congress for about 8 years. So I was around him and around his campaigns and spent some time in his various offices and going down to Austin to the Capitol and traveling around with him in the rural East Texas district that he represented. So I guess that was my early exposure to politics, and I always enjoyed it. I always had good memories of it. I thought it might be fun to do it myself someday if I ever had the chance.
So then you somehow became a lawyer, though. How did you go from that background to becoming a lawyer, especially at a place like Haynes and Boone?
Well, you have to make a living somehow. So I suppose, my dad was also a lawyer, so I had that background as well. He was a small town lawyer in Crockett. I always liked reading, writing, arguing, debating, and I suppose law was another logical interest for me. Plus, I saw, for people interested in being involved in government politics, that becoming a lawyer was often a way to do that. And so that took me to law school. And then when I got to law school, I kind of realized, well, most people that go to law school actually become lawyers. And I decided I would do that. And I actually enjoyed it. Ended up spending, I guess about 16 years as a lawyer, most of that here at my current firm, Haynes and Boone, before I saw that I would have a chance to run for office. And so I've enjoyed my time being a lawyer also. But as I said, it was sort of in the back of my mind that if something ever opened up where I might be able to run for office and have a chance at winning, I would look at doing that if the time was right. And so eventually that opportunity came when a seat for the Texas House looked like a possibility.
Click on that and zoom in on the decision that there was something viable, that there was an opportunity that you saw. 2018 was a great year, and we know now in retrospect, but how did you know before you signed up to be a candidate that this was your opportunity, that you weren't going to throw away your shot, to quote Hamilton, right? Because you're a serious analytical guy. You looked at the map, you saw the headwinds or the opportunities. What were you thinking? What led you to the decision to finally pull the trigger?
I wish I could tell you that I mapped it all out and planned to run exactly when I did. But the real truth is I finally had an opportunity in 2018 when I thought it could be viable for me to run for something and have a chance at winning. I'm a Democrat, as I guess we all are on this podcast. I was in North Dallas in an area that had not voted for a Democrat in I don't know how many years. It had been decades since a Democrat had been elected in the state legislature from the area where I was. But in 2018, it looked like, beginning in about 2017 when I decided to run, it looked like there could be a chance the district could swing. Obviously, Trump had just been elected and people were feeling very unsteady about that in general, I think. A lot of backlash to what was happening at the national level. And frankly, a lot of personal motivation for me, seeing that we had just elected Donald Trump to the White House, to think, am I actually going to run for something or not? Am I going to do this or not? Because if I ever am, this is the time. Now, I will tell you, I didn't necessarily assume that I had a better than 50% chance of winning the district in light of its history. In 2016, I think the district had been about 56% for the Republican incumbent. So I had an uphill climb. I calculated, though, that I had at least maybe a 1 in 3 chance of winning. That's what I thought was necessary in order to make it worthwhile to give it a run and to devote all the time and resources I would need to do that. I needed to feel like I at least had a realistic chance. And even though I didn't think I had more than 50% chance, I thought it was at least realistic and worth trying.
Well, I think you're looking at any race, especially right now for 2026. You're wondering we have a long shot in a lot of races around here, but we look back with a lot of nostalgia on this podcast and maybe in Texas for the 2018 cycle, because a lot of people flipped races, right? And including yours, right? As the story will be told, I'm sure, on this podcast with you. But I'm wondering, 2018, it was a Trump midterm, which is similar to what we have coming up. But what other factors were going on then that you think helped with those sort of headwinds and getting you past that sort of 1 in 3 chance?
Well, I think there were a combination of things happening around Texas, right in 2018. I mean, we had statewide candidates that were generating a lot of energy. That was Beto O'Rourke's first campaign. People were excited about him getting around the state and talking to people. We had a number of interesting challenges to Republican incumbents right here in Dallas. And I think those campaigns fed off of each other. 2018 was the year that Colin Allred was elected to Congress for the first time. His district encompassed most of the district I was running in. Nathan Johnson defeated Don Huffines, defeating a Republican incumbent in the Senate that year. So I think there's just a lot of synergy. And again, I do think the national environment played the largest role. I think people were worried about what we had just done as a country when Donald Trump had been elected president, and that was evident in Texas. That was the year that we gained about eight seats just in the North Texas area in the Texas House. So it certainly wasn't something I was doing all by myself. I think it was just a combination of a lot of factors. I always tend to think that for Democrats in a contested area, like a purple area, swing district in Texas, you need to have several things line up well. One is the national landscape and environment. 2 is, frankly, who is the Republican candidate. And only 3, maybe, is who is the Democratic candidate. I mean, clearly the Democratic candidates have to be people that are acceptable and have hopefully some appeal to the voters. But, we're living in a state that has been controlled statewide by Republicans for a very long time. I think you need those factors to line up in order to win in a formerly Republican district or formerly statewide in the state of Texas.
John, the word acceptable jumped right out to me in your answer. I think that kind of goes to the age-old debate as to whether you might call it someone unoffensive or maybe acceptable, or someone who's exciting. I think there's a way to be both acceptable and exciting, but it's kind of a tough road to hoe sometimes. I don't know if you know this about yourself, John, but the reputation online for you, if you were to look it up, is that you are a thoughtful, low ego, policy serious, and respected across party lines. This is my favorite quote. Not a Twitter Democrat.
Well, okay,
that's a compliment. I don't know.
I'll have to find out where you read those things out. But I honestly can't argue with the not a Twitter Democrat part very much. I've never been that much of an avid tweeter, not really a social media natural like some folks are, and that I always thought that's something I got to get better at. But apparently, whoever's writing this doesn't think I did. But it's funny that you made the point about my using the word acceptable. Obviously, that doesn't sound all that exciting or maybe super appealing when you put it that way. But I guess what I mean to say by that is people who have been voting Republican in Texas for a long time, I think, need to have a comfort level if they're going to be willing to switch over and vote for a Democrat. And, my background was, frankly, as a fairly I'd say centrist or moderate Democrat for my career. That's kind of what my dad was as well when he served. And so I think by saying acceptable, I just simply mean that it is important to be someone that independents and Republicans or former Republicans feel like it's not going to, I guess, they're not going to feel like they're voting for someone alien to their values or beliefs that they've had. Someone who is more in the center or mainstream. So I think that does make a difference in campaigns like the one I ran, but it doesn't mean you can't be exciting. I'm sure maybe a more exciting candidate than I was could have done even better, but at least we were able to get the votes we needed.
So you mentioned that you considered yourself a centrist or a moderate Democrat. And so these days, we hear a lot about being a progressive Democrat versus like, do we want to help get Republicans to cross over? And there's a lot of debate, I think, within the party of what we need to be doing. Do you have a sense of like how that worked for you in your race? Like was your messaging targeted to a more centrist audience?
I would say yes. In both the campaigns I ran in 2018 and again in 2020. Again, running in a district that had been voting Republican prior to that time. Now, of course, all of the advice that I got was that you need to do both. You need to make sure that we're doing our best to energize our Democratic voters and appeal to base voters. And frankly, when you're running as a Democrat, I didn't have a primary opponent either time, but of course, that's uncommon. Most people do have primaries, and you need to make sure that you're reaching out to Democrats and that people understand that you are, in fact, a Democrat. You're not just, donning that label temporarily in order to get elected, but it's part of your values and who you are. But of course, there are a range of ideologies within our party, and in a district like mine, yes, I couldn't run from the left, and that wouldn't be who I really was anyway. I ran more from the moderate, centrist, pragmatic perspective. Made sure, though, that people understood I was coming into this race as a lifelong Democrat and one who really believes it's time for Democrats to step forward and become the majority in Texas.
Yeah, and so I think I'm really interested in how you tailored the message, tailored your approach to campaigning to the district, because I think sometimes there's a kind of intellectual laziness that happens where people want to pick up a campaign playbook that honestly was maybe written for New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago and not for a city in Texas. And same for, statewide races. A statewide campaign for Texas should look different than it would in any other state. And so I think the better fit to the district or for statewide election for the entire state, the more likely you are to have success. So how did you tailor your approach?
Great question. And one thing I will point out is that in a way, things were set up in an advantageous way for me in the race because the Republican incumbent that had been in the seat, Jason Villalba, turns out he was defeated in the primary by a candidate who ran at him from the right, Lisa Luby Ryan. And so that had already set up a dynamic where you had some Villalba supporters, Republicans, who were probably not happy with the way that turned out and were going to be open to voting for a Democrat in the race. People have told me later that some of the things that influenced the way the race ultimately played out were some of the early endorsements that I was able to get in the race. Now, I'm not one that thinks endorsements are matter more than actually getting out there and getting your message out to the voters, but they can help set the tone a little bit. I was able to get the endorsement, for instance, of the Dallas Police Association. I was able to get the endorsement of a group of former business leaders, a kind of a list that I put together of names that many would recognize as having voted for Republicans, at least in some races in the past, kind of a diverse coalition of business leaders. Texas Association of Business ended up being supportive, and the doctors ended up supporting me. So those sorts of things helped to set the tone, I think. Ultimately, was able to get also an endorsement from Dallas Morning News. So Now, how many people are aware of all those things? I don't really know, but at least it for people watching, it helped to set the tone a little bit. Um, I think, Alex, though, in terms of just the message, uh, I wanted to make sure people understood. I was supportive of law enforcement. Believed that we needed to do everything we could to clamp down on crime. Needed to make sure that people understood we need a positive business climate, in addition to emphasizing the more traditional or typical democratic themes. And I think all that made a difference. I do remember, though, a few things when I was making calls once. I remember calling a woman, that I was just calling for votes, as you do. You get your list of phone numbers and you call. And she said, well, are you a Democrat or Republican? And I said, I'm a Democrat. And she said, oh, well, then you're not going to be interested in talking to me because my husband is a police officer. And I just remember thinking, really, you assume that just because your husband is a police officer that I'm the Democrat and I'm not going to be for you and you're not going to be for me. I pointed out to her that I had the endorsement of the police association and maybe helped to change her mind a little bit. But these are some of the things that we as Democrats in those swing districts have to try to overcome, and thinking we have to try to change.
Yes, it sounded like you kind of anticipate what potential attacks or weaknesses could be, and you sought out things that could address them. It seems very intentional and strategic, and it really does go to setting up almost like a permission structure for people who, like you said, they're not used to voting for a Democrat, but you've given them kind of like the scaffolding to help them get there.
Yeah, I like that term. The permission structure. One other thing I would observe, and in any campaign, as you all know, because you're involved in campaigns, Kate, of course, you ran a campaign yourself that did very well. You know that you have to get out and knock on doors. So I did knock on a lot of doors, and in my neighborhoods, one of the very common things I would hear is when someone would answer the door and I talk to them and I tell them I'm a Democrat, they would say, "Well, I'm a Democrat too, but I'm probably the only one on my street." And then I would find, four other people within, the same block that told me the same thing. And by the end of it, I was saying, you know what? I can tell you're not the only Democrat on your street. I think you are. I think the permission structure idea goes to that. People need to feel like, in a more traditionally Republican area, maybe a suburban area of Texas or a rural area that has in recent years been voting Republican, people need to know as Democrats they're not alone. And in fact, they aren't. I mean, the truth is, even in some very red areas, what we think of as very red areas of the state, there are a lot of people voting Democratic. And it's important for them to understand they're not out there by themselves.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. And I think the genesis of this podcast is like what you were saying, to defy stereotypes and maybe perceptions of who a Democrat is. And Alex and I have these shared experiences of being both with a military background, both having young children. We both have a Christian religious ideology. And when you think of a Democrat, sometimes I wonder, are we dealing with a perception issue rather than reality? And so I'm wondering, how do you see that now, given the 7 years that have passed since your race?
I think that's very true. And I mean, again, you all are both veterans, really illustrating to me, of course, that Democrats are should. It is obviously a Republican stereotype to say that Democrats, for instance, are anti-military or anti-American strength or not supportive of law enforcement. That's just not right. Of course, both sides, especially in my view, the Republican side, would like to paint the Democrats, the way a very small number of maybe very extreme members are, or more activist groups that are far to the left. The truth is, we have a diversity of views within our party. Now, I think as a branding matter, we need to do our best to make sure people understand the full range of views that exist in the party. And, if I have anything that I would try to emphasize to our party right now, and that is that we need to make sure we are coming across to a disillusioned Republican as a party they would feel good about switching to or voting for. because I do think there are a lot of disillusioned Republicans out there right now. I do not think that even among Trump voters, I don't know the exact percentage, but I think a very large percentage are voted for Trump with real reservations and would be open to a conversation about supporting a Democrat if they could be made comfortable with the idea. And that's what I think we need to be doing as a party.
Do you have ideas for what we should be doing at various levels and in various roles? I mean, the job of a representative versus the job of a party chairman versus at the local level, at the state level. Obviously, the DNC, people will associate national trends onto local figures, whether that's earned or not. And I think, was it Pete Buttigieg would always say, they're going to call you a communist or a socialist no matter what, even if you are endorsed by the business association or by the Dallas police. First, did that happen? Were there attacks on you that were just completely out of?
There were, and you're absolutely right. The way political campaigns are run these days, they are going to call you all those things, no matter what you really are. Mailers went out against me, where I was made into a sort of puppet or marionette, being controlled by various Democratic figures. Nancy Pelosi was one they put on there. There was another mailer that went out with me. Just a very ugly one, looking like trying to paint me as some kind of baby killer, covered in blood and wearing a hospital uniform. I mean, these kinds of things are going to happen, unfortunately, in political campaigns. There's some crazy stuff out there, and consultants are convincing candidates that this is what's necessary and this is what works. But what you want to happen is that when people see that, at least a large portion of them will know it's not true, because they already have a conception of who the candidate is, and they realize that what they're seeing doesn't jive with that, and it doesn't work. In terms of what we can do, I mean, I am not. It's never been my expertise to be someone in the party infrastructure or in, I guess, media campaigns to feel like I have a great answer for you, but I have often thought it would be smart of the Democratic Party to run ads out of election season. In other words, right now, here we are in October 2025 in Texas. We're a good ways away from the primaries in 26 and certainly the general in 26. But I feel like some ads to help promote our brand could be important now. Now, that costs money, I know, and that's always maybe the limiting factor. But just to help emphasize to people who we are as Democrats, what we stand for, and to start just working on the brand and conditioning people to realize that when we get called all kinds of names and painted in all kinds of ways as we approach the actual election day, that it doesn't ring true to them, and it maybe doesn't comport with what the impressions they've started to get over time. Honestly, I think that may have been happening in a positive way recently with what we've seen at the recent No Kings rallies. At the No Kings rallies, and I've been to both of the big ones that we've had recently. One I went to in Dallas and the other in Connecticut. Those to me felt like very patriotic rallies. Lots of American flags, lots of people, talking about our history and the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution and our basic values as a country throughout our history. And yet, the other side wanted to paint it as a hate America rally, as people that were against our country and its values. If you actually went to those rallies, you would see these are people coming out to stand up for our country and its values. And what you really saw was the red, white, and blue at those rallies. And I think if the more that sort of thing happens, the less believable it will be when we get to campaign season and the other side tries to paint us as anti-American.
It's patriotic and it's religious too, right? Like, no king but Christ the King if you're a Christian.
Well,
right?
Definitely a lot of, I think, religious motivation too among many people that came to those rallies. I think that's true.
Yeah. Well, let me just ask one more and I'll let Kate jump in next. I think sometimes as a party, just looking inward for a moment, our idea of the kind of candidate who will be acceptable to Republicans is not necessarily in practice the one that accomplishes what we think they're going to accomplish. And what I mean by that is, if you were to have polled Democrats right after George W. Bush won the popular vote in 2004 and said, who thinks a black senator from Illinois whose first name rhymes with Iraq and last name rhymes with Osama will be the person who flips Indiana, Iowa, North Carolina, Florida, right? Who would have thought 2008, like Barack Obama was going to be the person?
That's a really good point, Alex. I think you're right. If you'd been purely thinking of, okay, Democrats have to find someone who almost seems Republican in order to win at that time, obviously you would have been wrong. I mean, Obama, that's not what Obama was. I think Obama's part of his brilliance, though, is that he really did what I tried to allude to earlier in this conversation. That is, he really did get out and energize Democrats while also, making clear to independents and Republicans that he was not pushing them away. I liked. I remember back. If you go back to the convention speech he made, famous line about, we don't have blue states and red states in America. We have America. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't want people poking around in our libraries in the red states. I mean, he tried to find ways that he could unify us. As president, he tried to, I think, to unify the country. Now, obviously, you're never going to unify everyone in this country, but I think it's important for a president and a presidential candidate to make the effort, and he did do that. So it's a great point. I don't think there's just one way to win a race in a competitive area or in America at large as a Democrat. We've seen different ways of doing it. But in the end, I think to make an effort at some unity, to make an effort, especially in Texas, at, again, welcoming folks that have been Republican in the past and are looking for that permission structure, looking for a way to cross over. I do think that matters.
So it sounds like you're advocating for a one size, kind of like not just a kind of a broad strategy and not just ticking at one bucket of voters. Because I think about it, I know you're a strategic person and analytical. So like we have a low voter turnout state, right? We've got a lot of people not voting. We've got a lot of maybe some Democrats not showing up. And we might have some Republicans who might otherwise vote with us. And so it seems like you're saying that we need to be ticking all these boxes. Like there's something that we should be doing across all of those, or at least find candidates who can also speak to all of those kind of buckets, especially in a state like ours, where it is so diverse, where we have a large background of religions and ethnic diversities, but also geographic.
Definitely true. I mean, turnout is obviously going to be important in any race. Where I have maybe sometimes felt that we went a little bit wrong as Democrats is relying solely on turnout and thinking that turnout was going to rescue us. We know what happened in recent elections, including 2024 and to some degree 2022, is the other side turned out their people in large numbers. And we can't neglect that side of things. And I think that's largely, a tactical effort. It's something where the party can play a big role, local parties, even all the way down to your precinct chairs. To drive turnout is always going to be important of your Democratic voters. But I just think we can't neglect the other side of it, as you say. We've got to make sure that we're out there ready to appeal to independents and especially in the Trump era, Republicans that have had enough.
Yeah, and so I think you're in an interesting spot now because you've come out of being a candidate and a representative. You are now back in the civilian world here with all of us, back at being a lawyer at Haynes and Boone. And I think we hear sometimes like candidates may feel reluctant to be super critical of the party or what's going on right now in Texas to do better because they don't want to, make enemies. And I'm not saying like we want to make enemies on this podcast, but at least we can look inwardly and say, hey, what can we be doing better? And I think there's some folks that don't really want to even say that. Like, do you have any advice you would give to the party either locally or statewide, as to what you think now, having looked back on your races and your father's races, that we could be doing better or similar to what we did before?
Especially taking the long view, right? Because it's one thing if we win this midterm or the next presidential or even the one after the next election after that, but like come 2030 and all the reapportionment that's going to happen with the new census, we really got to get our stuff together. So if we have the next, 5 years before that happens, what do we need to
Well,
be doing?
I mean, first thing I'll say is uh, I never think it sounds very good to sound like you're sort of as a Democrat lecturing to other Democrats, because I mean the truth is, as Democrats we should be proud of who we are right now. We're on the right side of the issues at this moment in the history of the United States right now. It's uh, I think uh, a person who is really concerned about our American principles and values, the Constitution, the rule of law, even frankly, the free market and limited government can find a whole lot more that is appealing on the Democratic side right now than on the Republican side. I'll respect people if they want to try to advance those principles in the Republican Party, but it's not going very far right now on Trump in the White House and the people he's put in important positions around him. But what I would say though is, as I said before, we always need to make sure that we are thinking about that Republican who is discouraged by what's going on in his or her party, that independent who has voted Republican in the past and now is open to either side. We need to make sure that we are welcoming to those folks, and not just saying we're welcoming. Of course, we'd like to have their votes, but we need to demonstrate that we understand their concerns, their values, and of course, it's not just one issue. It can be a range of issues. I think to try to communicate though that on some of the issues that have been important to some of those previous Republican voters, we can at least communicate that we are open to a balanced perspective and a balanced approach. Whether it has to do with, I'll just cite as one example, guns, obviously a huge hot button issue. Um, Clearly, Democratic Party as a whole has been in favor of greater restrictions on the sale of some kinds of dangerous weapons, semi-automatic assault weapon style weapons, or raising the age at which people can purchase a semi-automatic style weapon from 18 to 21, whatever it may be. One thing I would say, for instance, it's very important for us as Democrats to reconnect with rural Texas voters. Uh, Obviously, suburban voters are kind of thought of as swing voters now, purple areas of the state. I think it's important just for the Democratic brand as a whole and just on principle that we continue to reach out to rural voters. I think there are a lot of votes there that we may be um, neglecting and not picking up just because we're not making the effort. The gun issue is one that I think helps to illustrate this point. Just to make sure that people understand that even as we understand the importance of obviously taking measures to reduce mass shootings and to make sure that guns are used responsibly, that we maintain our tradition of responsible gun ownership and usage in Texas by using things like basic licensing and training to carry a handgun, like we always had in Texas until that requirement was abolished a few years ago. Those things are important, but it's also important to make clear to people that we're not out to take your guns away, and we're not trying to create a stigma over people who use guns for hunting, fishing, or self-protection. That we understand that's part of our state, part of our culture, really, in Texas, and we have to find the right balance. I think we have to communicate that, not shy away from it. And so that's just one example, I think, of how we reach out beyond our the current boundaries of our party and try to welcome others in.
At a certain point, it's more than a policy issue. It's like a cultural issue, right? So much of gun culture is bound up in the Texas mythos, the Texas identity. I mean, your dad represented East Texas. I'm from Sherman, Texas. I think we all know someone for whom being a gun owner is a part of their identity. And you're probably imagining that person in your head too if you're listening to this podcast. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if these people genuinely actually own an AK-47 or other kinds of assault weapons. I know it's always like kind of like the academic exercise of it than the actual
Well,
practicality.
look, I think the gun owners of Texas, by and large, are people that use them responsibly, that use them safely, that are not, sort of flaunting them by openly, going into Starbucks with a, semi-automatic rifle draped around their shoulder. Um, uh, I think we need to make sure that we're clear about the fact that we're not trying to stigmatize gun ownership and gun usage in Texas in responsible ways. Um, Truth is, I think that is, in fact, a mainstream Democratic position. Democrats are gun owners just like Republicans are. Some Republicans choose not to own guns, just like some Democrats choose not to own guns. I think uh, what you would advocate about a specific measure, like should we, consider raising the age at which a person can purchase a dangerous semi-automatic weapon to 21, shouldn't obscure the fact that we understand that people use guns responsibly for all kinds of reasons, including hunting, including self-defense. And I think that's an example of how we should try to demonstrate to the voters of Texas that we are a big tent party and that we're not going to kick you out because you might have a different view about firearm policy.
Yeah, and I think of it similarly to what we see James Tallarico doing when we're talking about expanding our tent, right? Like welcoming people in. Maybe that's gun owners that were maybe no longer felt welcome, but we could maybe bring them back in. Or as James Tallarico is doing, are Christian voters and people that are religious. And do you see that, John? Like, and as far as like bringing people back into our tent or bringing people that were not otherwise there, like how do you see that going on right now in 2025?
I think definitely there are those on the Republican side among Republican candidates and consultants that are going to try to paint Democrats as being anti-religion, and I think it's a complete falsehood. My own experience, of course, growing up in East Texas, my faith's always been an important part of my life and my family's life. I grew up in the First Baptist Church of Crockett, Texas. My family and I attend a Methodist church here in Dallas today. And in campaigning, I will say that I saw the churches of my district being a very important part of, frankly, support that I had. Not because we think that religion and politics are the same, but we do recognize sometimes that our political motivations do draw upon our faith and our religious belief. And I don't think we should shy away from that as Democrats. And people like James Tallarico, you mentioned, Kate, are obviously making clear that that's a part of who they are. And sometimes the debate then shifts a little bit to, well, what is the true Christian perspective on some of these political issues? I don't think that's an unhealthy dialogue to have. I think obviously where it goes too far is when you actually move into the area of actual government endorsement of religion, coercion of religion, which is bad for both the political sphere and for religion and for churches themselves. But as individuals, we are people of faith, different faiths, and we are also political animals. And so as a result, it's hard to separate those two things when we're talking about politics and elections.
Yeah, so it seems like there are. It's not always Democrats' fault that they've been painted with this brush. These are consultants on the Republican side who have found ways to drive wedges within the culture and to insist that Democrats look down on them or would not accept them into the party. And it sounds like one of the ways you get around that is by being intentional and being active and trying to rebut those messages, whether that's with guns or with religion or anything else. But I also wonder, and maybe this is more of like a therapy session moment, like, are we always going to be on the Republican frame? I do think from a strategic and especially in a tactical point of view in any given election, it's very important to get out in front of what you anticipate are going to be the most important attacks against you. But from a broader perspective, like, how do we make sure we aren't just playing on the turf that Republicans want us to be on? Well, how do we go on offense? How do we make sure that they're trying to rebut the message
Yeah.
that
To
we're
frame
putting out?
them as anti-American. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I suppose to a certain degree, it's natural, I guess, as Democrats in Texas, because we have been living in a state that for statewide elections has been Republican for a long time now. And so if you want to change that, then you feel like you need to change the framing a little bit and change the negative stereotypes that may have contributed to being, staying in the minority. But I think you're exactly right, especially at this moment, because what we're seeing happening in the White House right now is so much more extreme than even what we saw in Trump's first term. And it's really an opportunity for us as Democrats to be, again, the party of support for the Constitution, for the rule of law, for frankly, decency and kind of family values. That's a phrase we used to hear about a lot on the other side. I think we can lay some claim to that ourselves and really go on the offense, because I think I believe a significant majority of Americans are really troubled by what is happening in the news cycle virtually every day right now. And it is our opportunity to step forward. And again, I suppose, Alex, what I end up doing here is once again almost sounding like here's what we're against as opposed to what we're for. But I'm not super bothered by that right at this moment, because I think Trump has given us a lot to be against at the moment. I think a lot of Americans really would like to just get back to a level of normality in politics, a level of decency. Again, respect for our institutions, for our Constitution, for the role of Congress, for those principles that we always kind of felt do define us as Americans. And I think to a certain degree, it's okay to be standing up and saying this is what we're against. And I suppose when you do that, what you're for also begins to come across. You're for upholding those principles, frankly, returning to many of those principles that we seem to have abandoned. I think that's a message that will resonate. I know some people want to sort of come out with the next agenda for, what our country will be in 2030, 2040. I have no problem with that, but I don't necessarily object to living in the moment we're in right now and making clear that our first priority is to stand up against some of the abuses that we're seeing happen at the national level.
So I think in our last few minutes together, I'd love to get your perspective of, are we going to flip? Like, are we going to do it? Are we going to do the dang thing here in the state? You flipped a district. We're back in Trump era again. You've talked about the extremism. It's gotten worse, in my opinion. Have they remembered what it was like back in 2018? Are we going to get back there? And do you think we're going to do the dang thing?
My guess, of course, is no better than anybody else's. It feels to me like this year could be not only 2018, but even better for Democrats, the way things are lining up right now. As I said before, in Texas, in a competitive race in Texas, I think the national landscape, of course, makes a big difference. The quality or lack thereof of Republican candidates makes a big difference. And then also, of course, the quality of Democratic candidates. I see those things lining up in some of our big races right now in Texas. And I think, last poll I saw of Trump's favorability in Texas, he was underwater in Texas. Trump was net negative in Texas, I think by about 4 or 5 points. That tells me something about where we are. Of course, as a state that voted for him not so many months ago by a pretty respectable margin. But I think things are shifting. It is an opportunity for us as Democrats to get out there and try to emphasize to. Again, some people I know are not open to the message. I mean, if there are those that think what Trump is doing right now is just what they voted for and they love it, and I'll still talk to them, and I'll still be friends with them, and I'll still be neighbors with them, and we'll get along and try to interact well in non-political contexts and even discuss politics, I'm all for that. But I know I'm probably not going to change many minds of those that are that convinced. But I think the percentage of people that feel that way is very far from a majority in Texas. And right now, I think the opportunity is really there. If we get out there, keep on working, keep on doing what we can to influence politics in our neighborhoods and our towns and cities, support good candidates, nominate good candidates. I think the Republicans are going to do us probably the favor of nominating some that aren't so great. And I think the opportunity will be there. And so I'm pretty excited, Kate, about 2026. It feels a lot to me like 2018 and maybe, frankly, better. But time will tell. Things can change. We've got a lot of work to do, and we got to make sure we keep the focus on continuing to try to get to the goal. And but I think we got a real chance.
That's a solid pep talk. I want to shift the gears from the abstract, though. I want you to imagine that someone listening to this podcast right now lives in a Republican district that should be competitive. Maybe this is a person you know, and you think that they would make an excellent member of the legislature or the county commissioner's court or whatever it is that they're looking at doing. What would you tell that person to get them to actually put their name on the ballot? Because it's one thing to talk about, but to actually put yourself out there like that, give them that specific pep talk. What would you say to them?
And I can say this, and Kate, I know you know it as well. Running for office is a real commitment. It does require a lot of time. It requires a lot of raising money. It is. I mean, it's kind of like being a football coach or something like that. I mean, you need to spend as much time as the other person does on the other side, and more than the other person does, to feel like you're going to have the best chance of winning. I guess it's kind of like being a litigator, Alex, as well. We know what that's like here at our law firm. You got to be willing to outwork the other side. And so it is a commitment. You got to make sure you're ready to step up and do it, because it's not going to be worth doing it if you just do it halfway. But it does matter right now. If you love our country and love our state, love your community, if you can find the why, then I think you can sustain yourself through the course of a long campaign and be willing to get up and do the work that's necessary to run and give it your best. And I think if you can find that motivation within you, feel like you care enough about our country and what's happening, that it means enough to you to be willing to sacrifice, your evenings and your free time and maybe other commitments that you have. Then I think in the end, it is a rewarding thing to do. I'm glad I did it. I enjoyed the experience very much. I hope I'll see both of you staying involved. But who knows, maybe out there running for something yourselves, or otherwise just supporting others that are doing it. But ultimately, I think, Alex, it just comes down to finding that motivation. And if you can find it, then I say go for it.
All right. Well, thank you, John, so much. My last question, you said you're not a big social media person, so I'm just going to ask, what do you got going on outside of politics? I know you're a lawyer, you're at Haynes and Boone, but what else do you got going on?
My more important roles in life than any of those things you mentioned are I'm a husband, I'm a dad, and I have two sons. One of them is now 18 at the University of Texas. The other is a 10th grader who is 15 years old. Most of I feel like my non-work life kind of revolves around family activities. Right now, my 10th grader is big into baseball. And so you might find me most weekends out at a baseball field somewhere watching a 15U or 16U baseball game. That's a lot of fun for me. Other than that, I like to read. I like to I enjoy travel and getting out and hiking and going to mountains and that sort of thing. One other thing I'm doing right now is teaching a class as an adjunct at the law school at SMU. I'm teaching a class actually about the Texas legislature. So I get to relive some of what I did over my couple of terms by talking to those students, and that's been a whole lot of fun. So that's how I'm passing most of my time outside of the legal world right now.
and hopefully recruiting the next generation. Well, again, thank you so much, John. And that's it for this week. We will see y'all next week, and God bless Texas. You can follow us on all socials at Mission Texas Podcast. Email us at missiontexaspodcast@gmail.com. This episode is edited by Juan Jose Flores. Our music bumper is by Adam Pickerel, and our cover art is by Tina Sohn.